Elsa, hello? My name is Elsa, and let me take you back to the days when life was seemingly scripted by the muses of love and prosperity. I was married to Alex, a man whom I not only loved but also deeply admired. He was kind, intelligent, and so deeply attuned to my feelings that sometimes I felt he knew me better than I knew myself. He was the kind of man who would text me a simple "I love you" out of the blue just because he was thinking of me. Our wedding was nothing short of a dream, a culmination of my deepest fantasies and reality merging into a perfect day. The venue was a charming estate, surrounded by lush greenery and illuminated by the soft glow of fairy lights as the sun dipped below the horizon. I remember our vows like it was yesterday. Elsa, Alex said, looking into my eyes with all the earnestness a soul could muster. I vow to be the reason you smile every day, to be the rock you can lean on when the world gets too heavy. In turn, I said, Alex, you're not just my love. You're my best friend. I promise to stand beside you, to encourage you, and to never let a day pass without showing you how much you mean to me. I remember looking into the crowd after we were declared husband and wife. My eyes met those of Alex's parents, Sarah and David, and they were gleaming with approval and happiness. Even Alex's grandfather, George, who was known to be a man of few emotions, had a tear in his eye. "You've picked a good one, son," George told Alex at the reception. "And Elsa, you make me wish I was 50 years younger." Alex laughed. "Grandpa, you were never as smooth as me even when you were my age." "Elsa, is he always this modest?" George teased. "Only when he's trying to impress someone," I replied, and we all broke into hearty laughter. Beyond the euphoria of the wedding, our daily life was just as fulfilling. I enjoyed a cordial relationship with Sarah and David, often going on shopping trips with Sarah and watching old films with David. Even George, who lived in a different city, would call regularly, and I felt genuinely close to him. It was all like one big, happy family portrait. But every portrait has its frame, and sometimes that frame starts to crack. Looking back, I can say those were the golden days. Love flowed like an unstoppable river, and it seemed like nothing could go wrong. We eventually settled into an apartment, our little slice of heaven that we were renting until we could buy a place of our own. I thought I had it all. A perfect marriage, a loving family, and a future that promised nothing but the continuation of this bliss. And so, it was with this sense of complete peace that I received the news of George's ill health. Little did I know, the universe was setting the stage for a revelation that would shatter my picture. Perfect life into 1,000 irretrievable pieces. After settling into our cozy apartment and navigating through the early years of marriage, the euphoria still hadn't worn off. That's why, when Alex's parents, Sarah and David, showed up at our door unexpectedly, their expressions painted with concern, it felt like a jarring note in a harmonious melody. "Alex, Elsa, we need to talk," Sarah began, her voice trembling. "What happened? Is he okay?" Alex asked, his voice tinged with an urgency I rarely heard from him. David took a deep breath. "He's been feeling under the weather lately. His condition seems to be deteriorating rapidly. We think you should both come and see him." A heaviness settled over me, as if the walls of our home suddenly closed in. Alex and I shared a quick, worried glance before springing into action. "We'll pack right now. Give us an hour," Alex said, and they nodded, their faces etched with lines of concern and sadness. As we zipped up our bags, the gravity of the situation hung in the air, heavy and omnipresent. "Are you okay, Elsa?" Alex asked, pausing his packing to look at me. "I'm concerned, Alex. Your grandfather is such a strong man. It's hard to imagine him being sick. I know. I feel the same way. But let's not assume the worst. Maybe it's not as bad as we think. Our drive to George's house was fraught with tension. The conversation was sparse, filled more with anxious glances and hand-holding than actual words. We were preparing for the worst while silently praying for the best. Upon arrival, we were greeted by George's caretaker, Nancy, a woman of tender smiles but tired eyes. "He's been asking for you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The room George was in smelled of antiseptics, mixed with a trace of his familiar cologne. There he lay, noticeably frailer than the last time we'd seen him, but his eyes, oh, those eyes, were the same. Piercing, thoughtful, and surprisingly sharp. "Ah, the lovebirds have arrived," he croaked as we entered, mustering a weak smile. "Grandpa, how are you feeling?" Alex asked, gripping George's hand with noticeable intensity. "Oh, I've had better days," George replied, chuckling weakly. "But enough about me. Look at you two, still as smitten as your wedding day." We both laughed softly. "Well, she still puts up with me, so I consider that a win," Alex joked. George smiled, but his eyes were serious when they met mine. He waited until Alex left the room to fetch water before speaking. "Elsa, can you come closer? I need to tell you something." Feeling my heartbeat quicken, I leaned in. Whatever George had to say, I knew it was important. It was as if an ill omen had drifted into our lives, signifying that things were about to change in a way none of us had foreseen. It was in that room, filled with the mixed sense of life lived long and coming to its twilight, that George set the stage for what would become the most challenging and revealing period of my life. "I need you to set up a camera in here," he said gravely, locking eyes with me. I sensed something amiss. Little did I know, he was about to unearth betrayal so deep it would sever the ties that bound us all. As I set up the camera that George had requested, 1,000 thoughts swirled through my head. Why was this necessary? Was George being paranoid due to his ailing condition, or did he sense something genuinely amiss? It felt surreal, an odd detour in a journey that had, until now, seemed so straightforward. I stepped out of the room, allowing George's privacy to return, albeit now under electronic surveillance. Alex's parents and Alex himself rushed back in. They seemed anxious to resume whatever they were discussing before I had set up the camera. "You're sure you set it up correctly?" Alex asked as he passed by me in the hallway. "Yes. Why?" He hesitated for a moment, his eyes unreadable. "No reason. Just making sure Grandpa gets what he asked for." Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the door opened. Alex, Sarah, and David walked out, each wearing a curious expression, almost elated like a person who had just found an unclaimed treasure. George beckoned me back in. "You can turn off the camera now," he said. I did as he asked, my fingers trembling slightly as I stopped the recording. George, looking both relieved and intensely serious, spoke as I settled back into my seat beside him. "Elsa, I want you to watch the footage. You'll see everything you need to." "What's going on, Grandpa? You're starting to worry me." "Just watch. Trust me." With a sense of trepidation, I played the footage back. What unfolded before me was incomprehensible at first. A casual discussion about George's assets, his will, and then a shocking pivot to the topic of debt. Sarah, David, and even Alex spoke freely about securing a debt under George's name, treating it as if it were a family heirloom up for grabs. Wait, a debt of $1,200,000. I heard Alex say on the recording. That would cover everything we need and more. "It's perfect," Sarah said. Dad won't even know. Elsa will be with him all the time, and she won't suspect a thing." I stopped the recording, feeling as if the room were spinning. My heart pounded in my chest, each thud echoing the betrayal I had just witnessed. "Grandpa, did they? Did they really just do what I think they did?" Sadly, yes. They took advantage of my weakened state to try and secure a massive debt in my name. They plan to leave you and me holding the bag. But Alex, he loves me. We had a beautiful life together. People show their true colors when they think no one is watching. Elsa. George's words hit me like a freight train, sweeping away the last remnants of my disbelief. As I emerged from George's room, I looked into the eyes of my husband and his parents. Those were not the eyes of the people I thought I loved and trusted. No, these were the eyes of strangers, calculating and devoid of genuine affection. "Stay with Grandpa, Elsa," Alex said. "We have to go." He didn't wait for a response. He didn't have to. What was once a unified family now stood as a house divided, each person left to grapple with the weight of choices made and trusts irreparably broken. And at the center was me, grappling with a betrayal so profound that it would come to define the next chapter of my life, a life that was once painted in vivid hues of love and trust, now stained with the indelible ink of deception. The house felt like a tomb in the wake of their departure. Alex, Sarah, and David had left as suddenly as they'd arrived, taking with them any semblance of familial warmth. But they also left behind a far more sinister legacy, the stench of betrayal that clung to the walls, poisoning the air with its malevolence. George seemed to regain some of his strength over the next couple of days, as if the revelation had invigorated him, given him a newfound purpose. I suppose confronting one's demons, however painful, carries its own form of liberation. We didn't speak much about what had happened, but the understanding between us was palpable. We both knew what needed to be done. It wasn't until a few days later that I finally heard from Alex. He called, and as I stared at the screen, my heart tangled in a complex web of anger, love, and an indescribable sense of loss. With a deep breath, I answered. "Elsa," he began, his voice dripping with feigned concern. "Don't," I cut him off. "Don't pretend like you care about him or me." Silence. "What do you want, Alex?" "I think we need to talk," he replied, finally breaking the silence. "You're absolutely right," I said, my voice cold as ice. "We do. We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a park where we had often walked hand in hand, discussing our dreams and aspirations. The place was now tainted, like every other memory I had of us together. As I sat on a bench waiting for him, I watched couples pass by. Their happiness seemed so genuine, so effortless, and for a moment I was consumed by a sense of mourning for what I had lost. Finally, Alex arrived. He sat beside me, and for a moment we both just stared ahead, lost in our thoughts. "Elsa, I can explain," he finally mustered. "Explain? You conspired with your parents to financially ruin your own grandfather. How could you explain that away?" "It's complicated. My family has debts, things you don't understand. So you decided to ruin another life to fix yours? Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I never meant to hurt you," he said, avoiding eye contact. "But you did hurt me, Alex. You broke my trust, shattered my love, and for what? Money? You have to understand." "No, I don't have to understand," I interrupted. "There's nothing you could say to justify what you've done. It's over, Alex." The finality in my own voice surprised even me. He looked broken, but it was a self-inflicted wound, one that had bled into the fabric of our relationship, leaving an indelible stain. "I'll be filing for divorce," I said as I stood up, and for your sake, I hope I never have to see you again." As I walked away, I felt an enormous weight lift off my shoulders, even as my heart weighed heavy with the residue of lost love and betrayed trust. The confrontation was over, but the repercussions would echo through the rest of my life. In that moment, I vowed to rebuild, to reclaim my dignity, and to find a way to trust again. But first, there was the issue of justice. Grandpa George and I had a legal battle to prepare for, one that would pit us against those we had once considered family. I wasn't just fighting for justice. I was fighting to regain my own sense of self, torn asunder by the betrayal of those I had loved the most. And I knew it was a battle I couldn't afford to lose. The next month was a blur of legal consultations, document gathering, and emotionally charged preparations. George and I partnered with a tenacious lawyer, someone who specialized in cases of financial fraud and familial betrayal. Each meeting left me emotionally drained, but also increasingly resolute. The day of the trial arrived. My stomach churned as I sat beside George, our lawyer, flipping through a final review of our case. Across the aisle sat Alex, Sarah, and David. They'd found an attorney who had the look of someone who'd seen too much, yet not nearly enough. Their faces were blank, void of the family warmth I once believed in. "Your Honor," our lawyer began, "we're here to prove that my clients George and Elsa were maliciously targeted for financial fraud by their own family. We have irrefutable evidence to support this claim." And so it began. Witnesses were called, legal jargon was tossed around, and somewhere in between, the truth was laid bare. Our lawyer played the video recording, that damning piece of evidence, to a courtroom that fell into a heavy, uncomfortable silence. "So, you admit to discussing taking out a debt under Mr. George's name without his consent?" Our lawyer pointedly asked Sarah. I thought it was a hypothetical discussion," she stammered. "A hypothetical discussion. You were in a hospital room, standing beside the man you planned to defraud." "It wasn't like that," Alex interjected, earning him a stern look from his own lawyer. "Your Honor, this is premeditated financial fraud," our attorney summed up. "The video clearly demonstrates the defendant's intent." It was then that George was called to the stand. Despite his frailty, he spoke with a clarity and conviction that commanded the room's attention. "George, did you ask Elsa to set up the camera?" our lawyer questioned. "Yes, I felt something wasn't right. I felt like a dying man being circled by vultures, even though those vultures were my own flesh and blood," George replied. "And how did that make you feel?" "Betrayed, heartbroken, but also determined to not let them ruin any more lives." The trial seemed to stretch on endlessly, but finally, the judge returned with a decision that would shape our futures irrevocably. The court finds in favor of the plaintiffs, George and Elsa. The defendants are ordered to rescind the debt and pay all legal fees. Additionally, the court recommends a criminal investigation into the actions of Sarah, David, and Alex. A hushed murmur swept over the courtroom. As the gavel came down, I looked at George, his face a mix of relief and bittersweet satisfaction. We had won, but at a cost that no verdict could ameliorate. As I left the courtroom, I found Alex waiting near the corridor. His eyes met mine, brimming with unshed tears, but whatever he saw in my eyes made him turn away, wordlessly retreating down the hall. It was the last time I saw him. George insisted on giving me half of the reclaimed money. "You're my family now," he said, "and family takes care of each other." "But Grandpa, you need it for your care," I protested. "Elsa, this is as much your victory as it is mine. You've lost a lot, and this is my way of helping you rebuild." And rebuild I did. After the trial, George's health improved significantly. He lived long enough to see me establish my own life, free from the chains of deceit and betrayal that had ensnared us both. I took his advice and used the money to start anew, to create a life that was truly mine. It was a life forged in the crucible of painful experiences, but one that ultimately belonged to me and me alone. 2 years had passed since the trial, a span of time that saw both the ending and beginning of many chapters in my life. My divorce from Alex was finalized soon after the court's decision, a terse affair that concluded without fanfare or sentiment. George, a stalwart presence throughout the ordeal, had passed away a year later, leaving behind a sense of peace and resolution that seemed to settle over his final days. His absence was deeply felt, but he had imparted one final gift, a handwritten letter that he asked to be read after his funeral. Sitting alone in my now cozy apartment, a space carved out with remnants of the past and new beginnings, I unfolded the well-worn paper and read George's words. My dearest Elsa, if you're reading this, it means I've moved on from this world. But I want you to know that you gave me the greatest gift possible, the gift of justice and the chance to leave this world with dignity. Use the remaining money wisely, and remember, you are stronger than you think. Love always, George. I traced my fingers over the words, each letter punctuating the immense love and respect that had come to define our relationship. It was then that I decided to use the remainder of the money George had left me to start a foundation that helped victims of financial fraud, specifically targeting vulnerable populations like the elderly. It's a wonderful idea, Elsa, said Emma, my best friend, when I discussed my plans over coffee. You're turning your painful past into a lifeline for others. That's the plan, I said. Taking a sip of my cappuccino, I've been thinking about how to make it most effective. Lawyers, counselors, financial advisors, I want a holistic approach. That's a legacy George would be proud of. I hope so, I said, pausing to glance at a nearby table where a young family sat, innocent to the complexities and potential heartbreaks of life. You know, it's strange. Despite everything, I can't bring myself to hate Alex or his parents. I just feel pity. That's because you've moved on, Elsa. You're not stuck in that chapter anymore. You're right, I agreed. It's time for new beginnings. And so, the Elsa Baxter Foundation was born. Within months, it had attracted both volunteers and victims in need, all seeking justice or the means to offer it. The work was hard, the hours long, but each success story brought an indescribable sense of fulfillment.